I never planned to speak. I wasn't even sure I'd attend, but something didn't feel right. And when the officiant asked if anyone has any objections, I stood up in front of over 100 guests in a candlelit garden surrounded by violins and whispers. I looked my father dead in the eyes and told him the truth about the woman he was about to marry. Before we dive in, if this story resonates with you even a little, show some love. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. These real-life stories always come with a twist you won't see coming. My name is Ava. I'm 15 years old, and 3 months ago, I found something that changed everything. My dad, a respected doctor and widower, thought he had finally found love again after years of grieving my mom. Everyone said he deserved happiness, so did I, but not like this. Because what I discovered about her, Sophie, wasn't just shocking, it was dangerous. The wedding was at a private vineyard estate in Northern California. Rows of white chairs, soft jazz, a floral arch that must have cost more than a year of my school fees. Everyone wore champagne tones. It was picture perfect. But behind the fairy lights and designer smiles, I couldn't stop thinking about what I found 2 nights before. Smells of lavender and gardenia filled the air, but to me, it was suffocating. I clutched the envelope tighter in my purse, the one I wasn't supposed to have, the one with proof. It started a month ago. Sophie moved in. She was kind, too kind, always bringing me things I didn't ask for, touching my stuff, sneaking into my room when she thought I wasn't home. At first, I thought I was paranoid. Maybe I was just being protective of my dad. But then I found the email, an open laptop, a message from a man named Derek. It said, "The papers are ready. Once it's legal, we split 70-30 like we agreed." I screenshotted it. Then I searched Derek's name. He wasn't a lawyer. He was her ex-husband. And Sophie? Her real name wasn't Sophie. I dug deeper. School records, old mugshots, news articles behind paywalls. She had changed her name twice. And in her past, fraud, financial manipulation, elder abuse. She targeted wealthy widowers. I tried telling Dad. He shut down, said I was being disrespectful. "You're just scared of change," he told me. So I printed everything. I kept it in an envelope. Back to the ceremony. The moment came. "If anyone has any objections..." My hand went up. Gasps, whispers. Dad stared at me, confused. Sophie's smile froze. I walked forward. My knees shook, but I spoke clearly. "I object because she's not who you think she is." I handed him the envelope, and for the first time, the room went silent. He read. His hands trembled. Then he turned to Sophie. She ran. Right there in front of the guests, she took off her heels and sprinted through the vineyard like a scene from a movie. Security caught her at the parking lot. Police were already on the way. Turns out there were open warrants. 3 months later, my dad's different. He listens more. He thanks me every day, and not just in words. He started cooking again, something he hadn't done since my mom passed. Simple things at first, pancakes on Sundays, then cinnamon rolls, burnt but sweet. He even joined me at school events, sat front row at my debate finals, cheered the loudest when I won second place. For the first time in years, it wasn't just him healing, it was us. The house felt warmer. The walls, once echoing with polite silence, now held the sounds of music, laughter, even arguments about who got the last slice of pizza. One Saturday morning, he surprised me. "I signed us up for a father-daughter retreat," he said, holding 2 folded flyers. "It's next month. Hiking, kayaking, bonfires." I stared at him. My dad, nature-hating, risk-averse, comfort-loving dad, wanted to go camping. "Why?" I asked. He smiled. "Because you saved me, and I want to show you what it means to be present. You did more than protect me. You reminded me how to live." The retreat turned out to be something out of a storybook. We hiked to the top of a misty ridge. On the 3rd day, while sitting around a fire with other dads and daughters, someone asked what moment made us proudest of each other. My dad stood up, hands in his pockets, and cleared his throat. "My daughter once stood in front of over 100 people and told the truth no one wanted to hear, including me. She saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life, and she did it with grace, courage, and love. He looked at me, eyes glassy. I didn't raise her. She raised me. People clapped. I cried. The following week, I got a letter from one of the guests at the wedding, a woman named Mrs. Brandt, who had sat in the second row with a hat that looked like a wedding cake. In cursive, she wrote, "I've been silent most of my life, watched too many people walk into bad marriages, but watching you stand up, so young, so brave, made me realize something. Speaking up isn't rebellion, it's protection. You gave me the courage to speak to my daughter, who's in a dangerous relationship. Thank you." I'd never met her before, but her words, they stayed with me. That moment became a ripple. A month later, our local paper ran a feature called "The Wedding That Was Stopped and Why That's a Good Thing." They interviewed my dad and even asked me to share my side. I told them the truth. Not just about Sophie, but about grief, about watching someone you love get pulled into something you can't stop, and about what happens when you finally do stop it. The story went viral. Emails poured in from people around the world, parents, teens, therapists, even a retired judge, thanking me for the courage to speak. One message stood out. It was from a girl in Texas who said, "I saw your story and realized my mom's new boyfriend was dangerous. I told my aunt. She got help. He's gone now. You saved us. You don't even know me, but you saved us." Then something incredible happened. A nonprofit focused on family wellness reached out. They invited me to speak at a teen empowerment summit. I stood on a stage in front of 400 people. Nervous, palms sweaty, but I held the mic and said, "Being young doesn't mean being silent. If something feels wrong, say it. If no one listens, say it louder." I was scared, but I did it anyway. And now, I get to stand here, with you, whole, unbroken, strong. The applause felt like thunder, but the silence after my last word, that was power. Back home, life kept getting better. Dad started dating again, slowly, cautiously, this time with eyes wide open and heart steady. He doesn't rush. He talks to me. He asks what I think. Not because he needs permission, but because he knows love should include the ones who matter most. Me? I started writing, keeping journals, turning the experience into something others could learn from. One of my pieces got published in a national teen magazine. The headline? "The Day I Saved My Dad and Found Myself." So yes, the wedding didn't happen, but something better did. We didn't get a honeymoon. We got healing. And from that healing came something unexpected, a new chapter, not just for us, but for others too. It started when my school counselor, Mrs. Ngata, asked me to share my experience during a student assembly. I hesitated at first. Public speaking still made my stomach churn. But then I remembered what it felt like to sit quietly while something dangerous unfolded right in front of me, and how many others might be sitting in silence, waiting for someone to go first. So I said yes. That assembly changed everything. I didn't use a script. I just spoke about losing my mom, about watching my dad break and rebuild, about the day I stood up and told the truth, even when no one wanted to hear it. When I finished, the auditorium was still. Then came the applause, loud, sustained, and not just polite, real. Afterwards, students lined up to talk to me. Some hugged me, some cried. One girl whispered, "I haven't spoken to my dad in 2 years. I'm going to call him today." Another said, "I've been scared to tell someone what's happening at home, but hearing you, I know I have to." Word got around. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a citywide youth leadership panel, then a regional conference. By the end of the semester, I was mentoring younger students through a new program called Voice First, designed for teens learning to advocate for themselves and their families. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was growing, and so was my dad. He started volunteering once a week at a local grief support group for single parents, the same group he used to quietly attend after my mom passed. But now, instead of sitting in the back, he led sessions. He shared our story, talked about vulnerability, about paying attention to the people closest to you, even when you think they're just kids. One night, he came home late with tears in his eyes. There was a man there, as he said, lost his wife last year. He's got a daughter. He told me he was about to get remarried next month, but after hearing our story, he decided to slow down. Said he wanted to build trust, not just a new life. Dad sat down and looked at me. "You're still saving people," he said. Then came the podcast invitation. A nationally known host who focused on family healing and teen voices asked if I'd be a guest. I thought it was a joke at first, but 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a studio with headphones on, answering questions for an audience of tens of thousands. She asked me what I learned from the experience. I told her, I learned that love without truth is just decoration, that even adults need guidance, and that sometimes it takes a teenager to see what others are too afraid to look at. The episode went viral. Emails, DMS letters, all pouring in. One came from a woman in her 60s. "You reminded me of my daughter who passed 10 years ago. If she'd had your courage, maybe things would be different. Thank you for speaking for the ones who couldn't." By summer, my story was being used in workshops across the country, training sessions for social workers, school counselors, and even wedding planners on how to recognize manipulation and prioritize emotional safety in blended families. I never set out to be an activist, but sometimes your voice becomes the lifeline you didn't know someone else needed. Then came the scholarship. It was called the Future Voices Fellowship, a full ride to any college in California for students who made a documented impact on their community through leadership and advocacy. When the letter arrived, I screamed. My dad dropped the laundry basket. We danced in the kitchen. He cried. I cried. He said, "Your mom would have been so proud, not because of the scholarship, but because you didn't just survive, you changed something." That September, we held a small event at the Vineyard, the same place where everything had gone down. But this time, there were no lies, no secrets. Just the people who mattered, friends, mentors, family. We called it a gratitude gathering. I gave a short speech under the same floral arch. This time, it was wrapped in wildflowers and paper cranes. I said, sometimes stopping something is the beginning of something better. This place was almost the setting for a mistake. Now it's a symbol of truth, courage, and growth. People clapped, but more than that, people felt seen. We ended with a candle lighting ceremony. Everyone wrote one thing they were grateful for on a tag and tied it to a string of lights. Mine said, "The day I didn't stay silent." And now, I'm planning to study psychology and family counseling. Funny how one act of truth, just one, can redirect your entire life's compass. My acceptance letter came in a thick envelope with a handwritten note from the dean. "We don't just want you here. We believe your voice is what this next generation needs." I'd been accepted into one of the most competitive human development programs in the state, full scholarship, room and board, and a mentorship under one of the top trauma psychologists in the country. But that wasn't even the biggest moment. The day before orientation, I received a call from a publishing house. They wanted to turn my story into a young adult memoir. Not fictionalized, not watered down, my real words. They had read the article I wrote the day I saved my dad and thought it could help thousands of young readers. At first, I was stunned. Me, a published author. They paired me with an editor who believed in preserving my voice, not polishing it into something artificial. The result? A book titled Louder Than Vows, What I Said When the World Wanted Silence. It debuted as an Amazon bestseller in its category within a week. The reviews poured in, raw, emotional, honest. One mother wrote, "I read this with my 13-year-old daughter. We both cried. Then we both talked for 4 hours. Thank you, Ava, for making space for conversations we didn't know how to start." Another reviewer said, "This book should be required reading in every middle and high school." But it didn't stop there. A production company approached us to adapt it into a limited series. The team? Majority women, majority survivors, people who got it. Who knew this wasn't just a wedding drama? It was a story about voice, healing, and intergenerational strength. They brought me into the writing room as a creative advisor. I sat across from writers, producers, and actors. At 18 years old, I was helping shape a national conversation. The show premiered on a major streaming platform 6 months later. It was called The Objection. In the final scene, a recreation of that moment, I stood up and said, "She's not who you think she is." But what made me cry most wasn't the acting. It was the dedication at the end of the final episode. For the ones who spoke up, and for the ones who still can. Meanwhile, my dad, he became a regular guest on relationship and parenting podcasts, not as a victim, but as a voice of redemption, a man who almost lost everything but found a deeper truth through his daughter. He started his own blog, Learning to Listen, where he wrote about emotional blind spots, healthy boundaries, and learning how to rebuild trust within a family. The blog reached over 100,000 subscribers within the first year. He got invited to speak at single-parent conferences, men's mental health forums, and even hosted a workshop called What to Ask Before You Say I Do. Locally, our community took notice too. The mayor honored us at a civic event with a proclamation naming June 12th as Truth and Courage Day, commemorating the day I stood up at the wedding. Schools started adding relationship ethics and emotional safety modules to their curriculum, modeled after the Voice First initiative I helped build. And every year on that day, our little vineyard hosts a gathering, not just for us, but for anyone who found their voice in a hard moment. Some are teens, some are grandparents. All of them carry stories they once thought they had to hide. Years passed, and that moment, the one that started it all, never stopped echoing, because it wasn't just about a girl interrupting a wedding. It was about interrupting silence. It was about teaching an entire generation that love is not blind, it's awake. And the story keeps growing, because now I'm finishing my master's. I'm a published author, a speaker, a mentor, and soon, a licensed therapist. But most importantly, I'm still that girl. The one who stood up, heart pounding, voice shaking, and said, "No more lies." And even now, years later, people still bring up that moment. Sometimes it's at book signings. Sometimes it's when I'm speaking at youth conferences or universities or even correctional facilities. Yes, especially there. Because one of the most unexpected outcomes of my journey came when a women's prison invited me to speak. I was nervous. I'd never been inside such a facility. I wondered if my story would feel too polished, too privileged, too distant. But the moment I finished speaking, something powerful happened. An inmate stood up and said, "I wish someone like you had spoken to me when I was 15. Maybe I wouldn't have ended up here." Another added, "We didn't have language for what we felt. We had survival. You gave it words." That visit became the start of a new chapter, rehabilitative storytelling workshops. With help from a few nonprofit partners and my former college mentor, I developed a 6-week curriculum called Rewrite the Ending. We launched it in 3 state correctional facilities. By the end of the first year, more than 300 women had completed the course, and dozens had published personal essays, poetry collections, and even reconciliation letters to their families. One of them, Letitia, a 38-year-old mother of 2, sent me a copy of her daughter's college acceptance letter. "She says she wants to be just like you," Letitia wrote. "But what she doesn't know is that you gave her mother the courage to be a mother again." Then came the TED Talk. I had written it over and over in my head for years, but never quite felt ready. Until one afternoon, after mentoring a high school student who had stood up against her abusive stepfather and helped her mom find a way out, I realized something. The story was no longer mine alone. It had become ours. So I stepped onto that red dot, with a room full of strangers, cameras, lights, and silence. And I said, I stopped a wedding, but what I really stopped was a cycle. I spoke about how truth-telling in families is often seen as betrayal, but it's not. It's the beginning of healing. The talk racked up 8 million views in the first month, subtitled in 23 languages, shared in parenting forums, classrooms, legal clinics, and even marriage counseling sessions. A psychologist in Germany emailed me saying, "We now use your story as a conversation starter with teens navigating blended families. It unlocks something. It opens doors we didn't know how to knock on before." And what about my dad? He retired early, but not quietly. He used part of his savings to open a community wellness center in our hometown. It's called Second Voice, a place for grief recovery, blended family support, and youth advocacy programs. He asked me to design the teen wing. I filled it with open spaces, circular couches, warm lights, books, and, yes, one corner booth designed to look exactly like the garden where his wedding was supposed to happen. A plaque sits above it that reads, "One voice can save everything." Now, every year we host an event called Stand Up Week. Students from across the state come together to share their stories, live, no filters, no scripts, just raw truth. It's not about shame or blame. It's about showing what happens when courage becomes contagious. One of my proudest moments came just last year. A girl named Lila, 16, stood up and read from her journal. She spoke about her father, how he had fallen into depression after losing his job, how he became distant, silent, angry, how she almost gave up on him. Then one night she showed him my TED Talk. They cried, they talked, he got help, he got better. At the end of her speech, she said, "I didn't stop a wedding, but I stopped my family from falling apart." And maybe that's the real heart of this story. It's not just about one day or one decision. It's about what comes after, the ripples that stretch far beyond the splash. 3 years ago, I would have laughed if you told me I'd be speaking in Parliament. But there I was, standing before a legislative committee in Sacramento, testifying in favor of the Family Safety and Transparency Act, a bill that would require deeper background checks for live-in partners entering households with minors, especially in vulnerable family setups. It was inspired directly by my story, and I didn't have to lobby for it. One of the lawmakers read louder than vows after his daughter gave it to him for Christmas. He said it punched him in the gut and made him rethink what it meant to protect his family. My testimony, backed by the support of advocacy groups, survivors, and experts, moved the chamber to tears. The bill passed unanimously. That day, as I walked out of the rotunda with my dad beside me, now an official family wellness advocate for the state, reporters asked what was next. I smiled and said, "Next, we make sure no girl ever has to stand up alone." That promise became the foundation of the No More Silence Fund, a nonprofit I co-founded to provide emergency legal, emotional, and financial support to teens and young adults who speak out about danger in their homes. We launched it with a modest goal, 50 grants in our first year. We hit that in 4 months. By the end of year 2, we had provided over 400 microgrants and built a 24/7 support line staffed by trained youth responders, people who understood, not just professionally, but personally. One of our earliest grantees, a 17-year-old named Malik, said this during our virtual gala. "Y'all didn't just help me out of a situation. You showed me who I could be. You saw me before I even knew I was worth seeing." That night, watching his face on the screen, I cried harder than I did the day I stopped the wedding. Because it hit me. This movement wasn't just about protecting people from bad choices. It was about restoring their belief that their voices mattered. The momentum continued. Universities began reaching out, not just for speeches, but to license the Voice First curriculum as part of their peer counseling programs. Then came the phone call that made me fall into my chair. Oprah's team. They invited me for a sit-down conversation as part of her Voices That Shifted the Culture series. When I stepped onto that iconic yellow rug in her backyard studio, I couldn't breathe for a moment, but she leaned in gently and said, "Just speak from where it hurts and where it healed." We talked for 42 minutes straight. She asked about everything: the wedding, the fallout, the rise, the ripples. She asked what I tell girls who think they'll be hated for telling the truth. I said, if silence is safety, it's a false one. And if your voice costs you people who were hiding truth, then you didn't lose anything. You survived something. The episode became the most viewed of the season. And the next day, my DMs exploded with messages from girls in Ghana, Brazil, the Philippines, the UK, all saying the same thing. Now I know I'm not crazy, I'm just the first to speak. Eventually, I wrote a second book, Not the Villain, a guide for teens and young adults navigating hard conversations within families, with exercises, personal letters, and real submissions from readers across the world. The cover? A bold sketch of a girl with a cracked mask in her hand and a whole world blooming from her mouth. That book became required reading in some districts, not because it was academic, but because it was human. This summer, the Vineyard hosted its 5th annual gratitude gathering. We had over 300 attendees, families, survivors, advocates, artists, even former skeptics. And this time, it wasn't me who spoke last. It was my dad. He stood under that arch, the same one he almost stood beneath as a groom years ago. And he held up the first photo we'd ever taken together after the wedding. That wasn't. I thought I was gaining a partner, he said, but I almost lost the daughter who became my greatest truth teller. Then he turned to me, and to any parent out there, let your child's voice interrupt you, because it may be the interruption that saves your whole life. We lit candles again, and this year we added a new tradition. Everyone was invited to write a message, fold it into a paper crane, and hang it on the tree of second chances planted in the back of the vineyard. One little boy's note simply read, "Because she spoke, I'm safe." And hanging next to his, a note from a woman in her 40s. Because she spoke, I remembered how to. So when people ask if it was worth it, interrupting a wedding, stopping a moment everyone wanted to believe in, I smile and say, yes, because that one act didn't ruin something. It rescued something. It brought the truth out of hiding. It gave me a voice. It gave my dad a second chance. And it gave thousands of others a first one. I tell them it wasn't just worth it. It was the best decision I've ever made. Because that day didn't just shift one life. It shifted generations. Earlier this year, I was invited to speak at the United Nations Youth Summit in Geneva. The topic, the power of the personal voice in social change. I sat on a panel with other global youth leaders, founders of climate organizations, education reformers, refugee advocates. But as I told my story of a wedding, a secret, and the truth that changed everything, every face in that room softened. And afterward, as I stepped off the stage, a delegate from South Korea approached me. She said, "We've translated your first book into 3 languages. Girls are reading it in shelters." One of them said it helped her realize what was happening in her home wasn't love. It was control. I couldn't speak. I just hugged her. Back home, we launched a global fellowship, Louder Voices, where 25 young people each year are given grants and mentorship to amplify community-based projects focused on truth, safety, and transformation. The first cohort came from 14 different countries. Some were rebuilding post-conflict zones. Some were challenging cultural silence in rural villages. All of them were fearless. One girl from India, Neha, created a traveling art exhibition made entirely from recycled wedding materials, veils, bouquets, broken centerpieces. Each piece told a story of emotional awakening or interruption, paired with QR codes linking to personal audio confessions. It went viral. Over 5 million views in one weekend. She messaged me, "If you hadn't interrupted your father's wedding, I wouldn't have interrupted my silence." And now thousands of girls are speaking. Then came a moment I'll never forget. The White House. I received the Presidential Medal for Youth Civic Impact, one of the youngest recipients in U.S. history. I stood in that historic room with my father in the front row, his hand pressed over his heart, and accepted the award not as an individual, but on behalf of every teen who has ever swallowed the truth to protect someone they love. In my speech, I said, "Interrupting a fairy tale doesn't make you the villain. It makes you the one who finally turned the page." By this time, the vineyard, once a symbol of almost, the wedding that wasn't, had become a sanctuary of healing. The tree we planted, it had doubled in size. Its branches were now draped with hundreds of paper cranes, fluttering like whispers of truth in the breeze. School trips came to visit. Workshops were held beneath the canopy. One mother knelt beside the tree, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "My daughter wanted to come here before her surgery. She says this tree gave her the courage to finally tell me what she was going through." We hugged. We didn't need to speak. Eventually, we published a final collection, Crane Letters, Stories from Those Who Spoke. It was a curated anthology of handwritten notes, stories, and reflections left beneath that tree over the past 5 years. The first printing sold out in 48 hours, and we donated all proceeds to launch Courage Kits, free boxes sent to young people around the world who are preparing to speak up. Each kit includes a journal, grounding tools, hotline resources, and a paper crane with this note: "Your voice is not too loud. Your truth is not too much. We are already listening." Now I'm working on a documentary. It's called The Girl Who Spoke, and it traces not just my story, but the thousands of stories that followed. From a boy in Guatemala who stopped a forced marriage, to a girl in Chicago who exposed abuse in her foster home, to a teacher in Morocco who changed her curriculum because of a single video clip she saw of my TED Talk. And when I watch the first cut of that film, I cry every time. Not because of what happened that day at the wedding, but because of what it became. It became a movement, a memory, a message. And as I look back now, I often revisit the quietest moment of that day. Right before I stood up, the violins were playing, the sun was setting, the world around me wanted peace, harmony, perfection. But deep down, I knew. Sometimes peace is only possible after disruption. And sometimes the only way to save something beautiful is to stop it from becoming something dangerous. So yes, I interrupted a wedding, and from that moment came a garden, a book, a movement, a tree, a fellowship, a film, and a generation of voices that will never be silent again. Because truth, when spoken with love, doesn't destroy, it builds. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is break the silence everyone else is protecting. I didn't ruin my dad's wedding. I revealed the truth it was built on. And in doing that, I didn't just protect my family. I created space for thousands more to reclaim their own. Because the real story isn't about the wedding that didn't happen. It's about the life that finally did. So if you're sitting with a truth you've been too afraid to speak, know this: your voice may shake, your hands might tremble, but when you speak up, you're not just interrupting pain, you're inviting healing, and that's always worth it. If this story stirred something inside you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter in this mind-bending journey. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because your voice matters here. Until next time, be the miracle, or recognize the one standing quietly beside you.